Even if Monarch Legacy of Monsters made us wait almost 3 years with a cliffhanger for a second season, it certainly delivered with the previous episode. While Cate and the others end up rescuing Lee Shaw. Unfortunately, the opening of this rift also brought along Titan X, or the great god of the sea, to Earth, along with a shit ton of scarabs. It didn't just end up pissing off Kong, but also led to Verdugo's unintended death, which brings us here to discuss what exactly happened in the second episode of Monarch. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. Resonance begins exactly where the first episode of the season left off. As everyone flies back to the Monarch ship, Lee and Keiko confirm to Hiroshi about their first encounter with his mysterious new Titan. They then go on to share their findings with Tim, who is now the new deputy director of Monarch, even though he doesn't really want the job and simply wanted Director Barris to handle the situation. During this time, one of the Scarabs is seen making his way towards the ship, but the entire crew is more focused on Titan X. Lee then asks Tim why they were not using Monarch's ship to intercept the Titan and send it back to Axis Mundi before it can actually do any damage. However, clearly Tim is way too aimless to take charge here, and so in order to prevent Lee from voicing any valid concerns on what the Monarch should do about the Titan, he ends up bringing up Lee's old run-ins. Of course, Lee knew that while they could sit back and argue about who was right or wrong, Titan X would use it as a window to wreak havoc. That is why they needed to focus more on how to control Titan X. Now, all of this might be a lot for Tim to handle, but he was self-aware enough to know that not following through on Lee's suggestion to go after the Titan would make him an idiot. Plus, Barris had also signed up on Tim's decision to chase after the Titan. Tim then thanks Lee for pushing him in the right direction, especially during a time when he was still grappling with the responsibilities imposed on him after Verdugo's death. Honestly, I have always found this guy wholesome since day one, and proves that when he chooses to go against Barris' direct order. Honestly, I have always found this guy wholesome since day one. And he proves that when he chooses to go against Barry's direct orders to detain Lee, because he understood how a man with Lee's experience in the matter definitely did not belong to a cell. This clearly turns out to be a great call, because just moments later, Monarch spots El Gran Dios del Mar moving towards the ships on the Strait of Malacca, seemingly with the intention of destroying them. Even though Tim asks for Lee's help to stop Titan X, he does not initially agree with his opinion to risk overheating the engines of the ship just so that they can catch up to the Titan. Luckily, Keiko persuades Tim to cave in. When Lee asks if Monarch had any weapons to subdue the creature, Tim relayed the lack of it, and so the entire crew got to brainstorming for a bit. Ultimately, they end up deciding that the best thing to do would be to use the only available drone's sonar transducer to emit an infrasonic signal with the hope to at least distract the Titan away from all those civilian vessels. This also allows Keiko and Hiroshi to reconnect because the mother and son have not really seen one another in an unnaturally long time. However, immediately after Keiko brings us Bill, Hiroshi immediately goes silent as he doesn't really want to talk about his complicated relationship with his dead stepfather. Having said that, Kike was very surprised by Monarch's technological advancements, but what I think would surprise her more would be the fact that Bill never really took care of Hiroshi after she was gone. Anyway, the next scene flashes us back to 1957 in Santa Soledad, where we see Keiko, Bill, and Lee reach a bit of an impasse because, well, Billy wants to hit the open seas as he now believes that he had mapped out the migratory route of Titan X and wanted to reach the location before it shows up. Keiko, on the other hand, wanted to stay back in the village in order to understand what was exactly enriching its waters. However, Lee simply wanted all three of them to stick together and also get out of the strange village, as they were not really welcome here. After a bit of kerfuffle, the trio decides that while Lee was going to stay with Keiko as they examine the land and waters of the village, Bill would go after the El Gran Dios del Mar in the ocean. Now, after he leaves, Augustin warns Lucia about how things would not end well for Lee and Keiko. And even though the bartender assures him that she was going to help them understand the customs of their village, Augustine makes it clear how the situation was no longer in their hands. Meanwhile, Keiko and Lee went back to the cave with the drawings, where the former was planting devices into the floor of the cave and having a chat about her first husband. Apparently, Hiroshi's biological father had died of cancer, but now Bill was doing a pretty good job as Hiroshi's stepfather. We all know how that ends. Anyway, their conversation is cut short after Keiko heard weird murmurs emanating from the ground beneath their feet, but somehow Lee could not hear any of it. However, before they could get the source of it, We see Lucia and Augustine show up in the cave to invite both of them to a festival they had held in order to celebrate their god. After Kiko accepts the invitation for the both of them, they go to this festival being held by the villagers as a way to show the El Gran Dios del Mar of their gratitude for providing them with an abundance of food every single season. Soon enough, both of them get drunk and actually start to really unwind and enjoy themselves in a euphoric sort of way. In fact, as they recollect their intimate moments from their first season, the festival turns sideways as Thomas suddenly arrives to gut what looks like the carcass of a dead shark and uses the blood from it to draw a double helix-like symbol on Lucia's forehead. On a side note, this symbol oddly looked like the Titan's eye, and for a second it seemed like Lucia has some sort of a connection to the sea god, as she turned to Lee and Kiko to tell them how they should have left when they had the chance. And with that, just moments later, we see all the residents return to their homes as an army of Scarabs broke free from the cave and chased Lee and Kiko to the shore. When they were surrounded, we see Titan X burst out of the sea and wreak absolute havoc upon the village. In the ensuing chaos, Lee and Kiko almost get crushed by Titan X, but because of how thick their plot armor goes, they end up saving themselves from getting killed by this giant seafaring monster. Well, the next scene brings us back to 2017, where we see Hiroshi meticulously going through the data he had acquired from the recent rift that they had opened on Skull Island, as he wanted to know why they even ended up waking Titan X in the first place. While Kentaro asks him to focus on the fact that they rescued Lee back to Earth, Hiroshi was seemingly too worried about bringing yet another Titan into their world, especially because humanity can barely deal with the ones that are already roaming around. So he doesn't even want to comprehend what could befall if they had to see the other side of the situation with the threat of Titan X. Now, Cate eavesdrops on this entire conversation, and naturally, it increases the negative thoughts she had already felt encroaching her head after she had pressed the button that ended up bringing a new Titan-shaped issue into the world, albeit at the cost of saving Lee. Even though Hiroshi does his best to pacify Cate, it doesn't exactly work. As she continues to sulk, May tells her to stop blaming herself for saving Shaw, because even if she did unleash Titan X upon the world again, Cate was not the only one who took the step. Sadly, her depressive episode is cut short when the Scarab who had previously infiltrated the Monarch ship has now begun killing the staff. While Cate tries to alert the crew of the ship about the Scarab's presence, she realizes that by the time Monarch would react to this emerging new threat, it would end up wreaking havoc. So she took matters into her own hands as she tried to tackle the creature all by herself. During this time, we also see all the other Monarch operatives trying very hard to get Titan X's attention with their custom drone, but the creature barely responded. However, when Cate, May and Kentaro take down the Scarab by shooting it with 2 flares, the monster sets off a high-pitched sonic blast that immediately alerts Titan X. And so, the kaiju immediately turned its attention from the fleet of ships on the Strait of Malacca and began racing towards the Monarch vessel. To make matters worse, since the ship was not built for any sort of high-speed pursuit, or anything remotely combative, the engines ultimately gave up, and it ended up getting stranded in the open waters. Now, after everyone figured out that if they returned the Scarab, it could end up saving them from the kaiju's wrath. And so we see Lee taking it upon himself to wrap the injured Scarab and race out to the sea in a speedboat, hoping to draw Titan X away from Outpost 18. Of course, the plan works out, even though Lee almost gets killed by the kaiju in the process. Honestly, if I took a shot every time this man had a near-death experience in the show, I would be hammered right now. Anyway, as Titan X reunites with the injured sea scarab, we see the two drift away from all the ships. While it seems like the Monarch team lives another day to continue their mission to understand these mutos, we still do not know what the Titan X really wants. Even though it is not clear if this new mega kaiju is intelligent enough to have an agenda, based on what we know from what happened in 1957 and 2017, it looks like Titan X is a mother to these scarabs. From the fact that there is a host of them clinging onto her to the way that she immediately abandoned her mission to rescue the injured scarab, there is clearly a bond there. Plus, they can also communicate via the lighting on their respective tentacles, which really is pretty damn fascinating. Honestly, I think Titan X just wants to roam around the earth and give birth to more such scarab babies. And if some humans benefit from it, what is the harm in that, right? Well, unfortunately, harming her scarab babies, even in self-defense, would mean that Titan X would respond with violence. and that is why there is a high chance that the season would end with Kong having a brutal showdown with the kaiju before killing it. So far, it really seems like Titan X is not inherently evil and just wants to peacefully exist alongside her Scarab children in her home, but this is really just my theory. Up until this point, Monarch Season 2 has been going all in on the idea that Titan X is the deadliest of all the Titans, and now we know why. We are no longer talking about one sea monster anymore. We are talking about a Titan that has an army of thousands of Scarabs, and there is certainly no bond stronger than a motherly one. This basically means that even if one Scarab gets harmed, Titan X would be staring the humans of Earth in the face. And because Monarch is actively trying to avoid another G-Day, this makes for a very complicated situation, especially if these Scarabs end up on the land and start attacking humans. Furthermore, it also seems that the Scarabs do most of the land work, which allows Titan X to pick off any victims awaiting her at the shore. So the impending chaos of it all might be worse than G-Day. Naturally, there are only 2 Titans powerful enough to fight Titan X, so maybe we will see Kong fight the army of Scarabs with a bit of human help in the future, while Godzilla rises from the waters to put Titan X in her place. Having said that, I would like to point out another thing. That is the fact that Titan X can seemingly communicate with people, especially women, as Kiko heard those vibrations when she was listening below the cave, while the young Lee could not. Similar to that, Lucia also seemed to connect with the creature when she drank the blood. And back in the present, Cate felt a similar rush or an intense feeling whenever the water the Titan X swam through brushed against her feet. I don't know if there is a validity to this point until the prequel show confirms it, but one thing this episode did prove was just how powerful this new Mega Titan really is. Well, that brings us to the very end of this episode. What do you guys think about the latest revelations about Titan X, Monarch Legacy of Monsters?